Welcome to Hello Kind Soul Podcast, where we raise the vibration of kindness on a global scale. I'm Dr. Ebony Green, your host, and I'm super excited to be with you today. If you want to follow us on all major platforms, look us up at Hello Kind Soul Podcast. And if you want to follow me, look me up at E Green Equity. I hope you enjoy the episode. Have a great day. Welcome to Hello Kind Soul Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ebony Green. I'm so grateful to be in community with you. But more importantly, I'm really, really excited to introduce a guest that's joining me today. Her name is Tasha Speed. She is an amazing human, y'all. And it's interesting because all of you out there know that you've met people along your path. And when you met them, you a real one. And so I was doing some work at a place she was working. And that was that moment where you're like, you a real one. And so fast forward a couple of years, she's here on the pod to chop it up with me today. So welcome. And I'm super excited to see you today.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm excited to be here. Just the fact that you even offered for me to come, beyond excited. And so I am Tasha Speed. I am the founder and CEO of Process Prosperity. Year ago, I jumped off the boat and decided to open my own business. It's coaching and consulting. And I specifically enjoy working with Black women, women of color who are leaders. And mostly because it's a relatable experience. We get into these leadership perspectives and then we realize that we put ourselves on the back burner. We don't prioritize our health. We don't prioritize our time, our families, and it drowns us. It suffocates us. And there's something that I want to do when it comes to alleviating that for those women, because I was in that space myself. And so for me, I do coaching to kind of say, like, put your mask on first, like, let's figure out what you need to do to be okay. And then I support them in whatever role they are in. So we do organizational development, capacity building, also coaching for their teams, organizing processes and systems, redesigning, just so things can flow better, more smoothly. So that's one role and one hat I wear. I also am the Chief and Finance Operations Officer for a dope national nonprofit called Women's Democracy Lab. We support women of color all across the nation who are elected officials. And then I also just recently jumped back into recreational therapy. It was one of my first passions and loves, and it's been fun to do. I do it in a rehab facility, and I get to have direct contact and do direct services with people who are on their way home to bring their fun and their leisure back in their life. So it kind of all comes full circle. So that's a little bit about me, what I do.
Awesome. So just really quickly, do you have social medias? If you want to shout them out, feel free to do so. Some people do, some people don't.
Yes, you can find me on LinkedIn. My personal page is Natasha Speed. My business page is Process Prosperity. Process Prosperity on also Instagram. And then we're going to stop there because y'all don't need my other socials.
All right. Awesome. So interestingly enough, you said in your intro, right, like this idea of like, okay, I teach people to put their mask on first, right?
Yeah.
And so prior to us coming and starting recording, we had chatted about the book I wrote, Acts of Liberation. And the interesting thing about Acts of Liberation, it really was like the first time in my life that I think I put the oxygen mask on first because I realized I couldn't breathe. But it required a season. I was on the struggle bus, folks.
Talk about it.
Limping along, barely limping. And as a result, this book was born. So I'm curious when you say, put your oxygen mask on first, what does that mean for you?
That means understanding what you need to be okay, because we're not always okay. And I think that hearing you say that was, what allowed you to go into writing that book, that's what allowed for me to decide to leave my job and make a lot of changes that I've made in life recently. And so being able to put my mask on first is first awareness, saying that I'm not okay. Because sometimes we just keep pushing and we think we're okay and we keep pushing. So first you have to say, I'm not okay. This is not okay. The way this is happening, it's not right. And then from there, starting to set the conditions about, okay, well, if I'm not okay, what do I need to be okay? And then once you understand what you need to be okay, the next piece then is, okay, so what's the things I need to do to actually go from here to there? And I think that it helps to break the process down because we as women, we as leaders, we as just humans have an experience on this planet. I feel like there's so much that's either put on us or we put on ourselves. And then there's so many things we're constantly always chasing, fighting for, combating. And so it's just like breathe. Like stop and breathe. You know, you have a background in education. I do too. Also just different health, human services organizations. And I find that most of the time the people that go into those jobs, they do it from their heart. Like it's their heart's work. It's what they want to do. And you talked about it on one of your podcasts. Like sometimes once people get into the table, they don't recognize themselves.
100%.
And so I see that. And I remember just having real conversations day to day in the last organization I worked in. And I realized that there were so many other women that was just like me, and I was drowning. And they would say, you build a plane while flying it. And my thing was like, no, we building a fleet. Like this is, we building a whole fleet. Like, and I realized I was like, oh, but I'm not okay. Cause I was staying up to the wee hours of the morning. I wasn't eating right. I wasn't prioritizing me. I have another business where I make products, and that business is called New Queen. And in that one, I say that I coin us the back burner queens. We put ourselves on the back burner. And so for me, the oxygen mask piece is acknowledging that you have to breathe at some point. You know, like I think about when I was in my last job, I used to get there at 9:00 and I would go call after call after call after call. And sometimes I'd come flying out and run down the hallway to go to the restroom at like 2:00 in the afternoon. And there was a lady who sat at the front desk, Miss Deborah. Shout out Miss Deborah. She was amazing. And she was just like, baby, you got to stop doing that. And I was like, I know, as I'm going back. And then next day, same thing, because I'm backing the calls up, but I wasn't eating lunch. I wasn't taking time to go use the restroom. Like I literally was just pushing me to the back, and I wasn't breathing.
So let me ask you a question. So you say like, I wasn't eating lunch. I wasn't, going to the bathroom. Like those are pretty basic needs, right? I'm curious, what do you feel stopped you from doing those things? Like, was there an environment? Like sometimes there's an environment that you may say, was it your own self? Like, what do you think, and maybe not even for your own circumstance, but what do you think is what stops people from caring for themselves when we intuitively know, like if a young person is sick or needs all these things, we'd give it to them. What stops you, and you think, in other people like us, from caring for their needs when they know their goal to change the world is a lofty goal? They know how much is required.
Yeah.
Do you think you understood the sacrifice of that? And essentially, what had to happen for you to like figure out like, okay, this cannot continue? Like, what did that look like and feel like and sound like for you?
It's a great question. For me, I feel like so this had been years in the making, right? So it wasn't just that flip of the switch in that like going from not using the bathroom to like, okay, I'm walking out. It was in 2017, I underwent a surgery, and I was sitting and had nothing to do but read a book. And there's a wonderful psychologist. Her name is Dr. Roselle Jenkins. Shout out to her as well. And I read a piece of her book where it said, the way we cater to ourselves is a reflection of our self-love. And I remember I felt so offended.
Say it again for the people in the back.
The way we cater to ourselves is a reflection of our self-love. And I was offended. Like I was mad. I was like, I love myself. Like she trying to tell me I don't love myself. And then I realized I was like, oh, because actions speak louder. And so that was in 2017. And so I feel like since then I had started to prioritize caring for myself a little more. And so what I did not say about that running to the bathroom piece is the difference in that period was I had already pulled other layers off. Like I had already started to go home at a decent hour. I had already started to like do certain things that I never had done before that. That was kind of towards the end of me realizing I wasn't taking care of myself. And I think the transition there, so that was what, fast forward 7-8 years later, was the fact that I had found moments of peace along the way throughout those years. And I remembered what that felt like. And then it's something about like, once you start to do that healing, you start to, prioritize yourself, you start to love on you, you get to those moments where you feel good. And it's like, oh, I can breathe. But then you revert back because you're going to your default. And so I think that like that was a moment I would do good, then I revert back. And I realized I was like, oh, like this is not where it's at. Like I don't feel good. And I think because I had started to do that work over time, I realized that I didn't feel good. And so it's kind of like what I said before, like you have to have the awareness first. And that awareness had come for me a couple of years before. It just was that I kept going back to my default behavior. And then I realized in that moment, like, I don't want to do this no more. Like, this is not how I'm supposed to live. And I also had been having like these downloads and callings from God that I realized like that I was supposed to do something bigger. And that scared me. But I knew it was something else that was supposed to happen. And so I had to be true to that calling that I was having.
I love that. It's interesting because when you say that, when you said familiar, I was like, like the whole purpose of Hello Kind Soul is like we're journeying back to our kindest self, right? We're journeying back to the kid who really believed and knew that the impossible was possible.
Yeah.
Right. And so when I'm thinking about, and I can kind of envision you kind of going through that process, there's this moment of like familiarity of peace. And peace is like a drug. It's better than a drug. Like once you seek and find peace, like you'll fist fight people to keep it. Like, right? Like,
that's
like
it.
Do not disturb, right? So I'm wondering if you can, think back your first day after you decided to leave. Or let's do the first day you actually left. Like you woke up the day after your last day.
Yeah.
What was that feeling like in your body? Like what ran through your head? What were your first thoughts? Like, and I say that because there are people out here who, one, think they can't leave. Two, don't realize that leaving doesn't mean you're going to be unemployed. Leaving means you're going to create a plan to free yourself from the limitations to be stuck.
Yeah.
And so there's a gift that comes when you walk away. And there are things there are ways that you look at yourself that you won't prior to that moment. And so I want you to gift them with that reflection for folks who are like, I'm stuck and I can't leave. Is it worth it? Like for you, what did that feel like?
The answer is yes. Do it today. No.
We are not responsible for anyone quitting their job. No.
No. But I think that for me, the feeling the next day was, I was proud of myself. I felt very happy that I had actually made the plan because it wasn't just a light switch like I'm leaving tomorrow. I had started because I knew I wanted to get back to all these things that brought me joy. And so I had started to put the work in and get connected with the organization so they could do matching for me to have a contract. So I had a contract lined up. So for a short period, I was working my job and also working my first consultant gig. And so that next day when I left, it was just like, okay, I'm going to be okay. And I was proud of myself because I left in my own way. Because truth be told, the next day there was a lot of fallout and things that happened in that organization that everyone didn't have that opportunity. And I was able to leave in the way that felt good and genuine to myself. I was able to leave my projects the way they were supposed to. I was able to connect with my team, make sure they were supported. And then, but most importantly for me, I was able to breathe and I was able to do it with a clear conscience and say, you know what, I did everything I was supposed to do while I was there. Now I'm able to walk into this next piece. And it was scary for a second because, and I say for a second, I had started to talk about leaving maybe 2 years prior to that and kept thinking, oh, okay, let me figure out what I need to do. And I kept pushing it off. But it finally got to that point. And so that next day, funny thing is the next day I actually was getting on a plane to go into the Bahamas. Let me talk about that really quick, which is when you start to walk in faith and you start to walk in your purpose, the way things organize and line up, we just was talking 100%. About that. Like you can't plan it better yourself. So by the time I actually decided that I was going to leave, my birthday is at the end of August. And so I already knew that I was going to go on this trip. So that was planned before I decided to leave. Just so happened 2-3 months before that, I started to put the pieces in. I started to do the succession planning. I started to think about, okay, this consultancy, let me go after a contract. Just so happened, I was supposed to start that contract in July. I didn't get to start it until August. And then I put my 3 weeks notice in, and that day just happened to bump up against the next day I had a vacation plan. So also, beyond being proud of myself, I also felt like I was walking into freedom because I literally the next day got on a plane, flew across the water and was on the beach.
I love that. And it's interesting because we talk about that. Like when you make a decision that is for you, every door opens.
Every door.
When you stay in places that you're not supposed to be in any longer, like when the season's over and you overstay your welcome, all hell breaks loose, folks.
Yeah.
So, I'm curious. So you did say you were reading part of the book and that there were things that came up for you. Yep. And so I'm curious, in reading it, what are some of the places where you're like, oh, like here's something that makes sense? And how are you applying it as you're making your, forging your path forward?
So I can attach it to even just that conversation we just had, because you have a piece in the book where you talk about that these tower moments, it gives you the choice to move towards, like walk out in faith and move towards your purpose, or it does it for you pretty much. And so when I talk about being proud of myself, I think that was a moment where I had this, like, it was this inner feeling, this burning thing that I knew I had to do, even though I was scared of it. I was blessed to know that I did it because, again, the next day I saw the way it shook out for other folks, and it wasn't pretty. And so I was like, oh, wow, like that was me stepping into that unknown and choosing to do the work. So that way it kind of avoided what could have looked like a different way. The other piece is like, man, you got me doing deep work. Like I've been doing this work, like I said, for a long, like I and you said this before, like, I don't think you ever stopped doing the work, but more specifically, there's a section where you have questions. And I love that about the book, right? Because you have your chapters, like it goes through where each chapter serves a specific purpose. And then at the end, you have these very specific questions where people need to sit and deal with it and unpack. And I started to do that unpacking. And one of the areas that I started to come up with was recognizing that what is the root of my self-sabotaging behavior? So me, like I said, me choosing to journey into my own business, it's been hitting at me for a while, and I keep pushing it off. And what I realize is I can show up for somebody else like nobody's business. I'll show up, I run circles, like I do the thing. But when it comes to me, I self-sabotage. I don't show up the same way. I let things kind of fall off. And I haven't got to the root of that just yet. And your book has already helped me do that. I haven't even got to the root of that in therapy just yet. But your book helped me get there because you talk about your experience and being a young child and when you lost your father and like what that brought and the abandonment. And I honestly never thought that I had experienced the abandonment piece because I also lost my mother when I was young. And what I realized was me choosing to self-sabotage, it often shows up as like people pleasing. So that would be me putting everybody else first. And what I was able to dig deeper in this book and realize was that people pleasing was a symptom of the abandonment, because when I lost my mother, I think what I realized was there was a time where she was sick, and I remember we was at the church and my cousin was standing with us and people were crying over us and putting oil on our heads and all this stuff. And I remember her boyfriend or a guy she was talking to, he was like, "What's wrong with them?" And she was like, "Their mother's dying." And I knew my mom had not been feeling good. She would close her eyes and I'd be like, "What's, you sleep?" She's like, "Nah, babe, I'm just resting my eyes." But it wasn't until that moment that I realized what resting her eyes really meant. And so then it hit me. I was like, oh. And I think as a young child, I started to think, how did I not know that this is what was happening? And then I started to think, well, what if, me and my sister, me and Tia didn't, try to be bad and find out where the Christmas present was? Like, I started to think about these things, like what if I was able to help more? And so then at 8 years old, I became this little helper for adults in my life. They obviously helped me and poured into me, but I felt like it was a responsibility for me to do that. And I started to prioritize other people. And so I think that your book, like on a very, very deep level, allowed for me to get to the root of what that people pleasing was about. And it was about showing up for people and trying to be this helper and do the things that I felt like I needed to do, should have done, so that way I don't lose them. And that's not the case. Like I don't have to do that. But I didn't get to the root of that until I read your book.
That's amazing. Like, that's amazing. And
yeah.
And it's amazing because people have said to me, like, if you knew what God really wanted you to do, you would mess it up, right? And so when I think of self-sabotaging, it makes me think about, if we can't take care of the small things, we certainly won't be charged with the big things, right? Yep. And so, it's basic for you to make sure you're good. It's basic for you to take care of you, right? But it seems so much further away from many of our realities, right? I think most people, to your point, educators, firefighters, police, all the human health services, we're really just caretakers. Yeah. And if you speak to most of them, there were situations in their life that they couldn't control. And so they spend the rest of it trying to solve the problems for the other people. But a well you is a blessed me. And that's the piece that we really have to kind of situate ourselves around, right? Like because if you're not good in your totality, then the thing you're here to do, you can't do. And what I've said as many times as I can say is there are people in this world waiting for Tasha to break free. Yeah. You feel me? So figuring out like how do we do that work? And it's funny because when I read the book several times, I had to read it back for different reasons. And there are even times where I'm like, oh, that's a good question. But the questions are hard. And so they have to be done with a grain of salt, if you will, right? Yeah. Or granting yourself grace that there are questions that are asked. There are questions I asked y'all that I couldn't even answer and I still can't answer, right?
And so stop.
Yeah, because they're not meant to it's a tapas, right? Yeah. Not a whole meal. Like you can go back to it, but I think this idea of you getting to the root or working towards getting to the root of like, where does self-sabotage live in me?
Yeah.
And how does that show up in my life is important because as I said, there are people, masses of people waiting for you to not be afraid of your brilliance.
Yeah. And that was the scary part. I feel like I remember growing up and hearing people say, oh, people are scared of success. And I was like, that's dumb. Like, why would you be, scared of, but it's not until it's success in the form of realizing there's something greater, bigger than you that is like on calling on your life. And then it's like, oh, and you said that before too, like, if you're not scared, then you're not dreaming big enough.
100%.
And so I think once I got to that point, it was like, oh. And to, go into the second part of your question, because you said, well, what has it done to help like forge this path I'm on now? I think it's a reflection of me being here today.
Amen.
Give it up. Because, like when I think about that, my goodness, like I said, the way I show up for other people is not the way I show up for me. And whenever we had the conversation, he was like, hey, do you want to come out? Well, or be a guest on the podcast? I was like, sure. Not realizing that it was going to be in New York. And so it made me start to think through like, okay, well, this is in 2 weeks. How am I going to work this out? And it would have been easy for me, I think, to text or call and say, hey, can we do this virtually? That would have been like the easy way out. But instead I said, you know what? Dr. Ebony Green, like she's busy. She's all over this world. She's writing books. Like she's doing podcasts. She's doing all kind of stuff. Like, let me figure this out. And what I realized is kind of just like everything else in life, when you start to walk towards your calling, God figures it out for you. 100%. So the moment I thought I was starting to figure it out, once I started to put the pen to paper and my fingers to the keypad and starting to figure out flights and things like that, everything just started to unfold. And I received blessing on blessing on blessing on how I was able to get here today. And I think that was further validation that like, yeah, you're on the right path, like you're doing. And even though I don't really know all the things I'm doing right now, I'm clear that I'm moving towards the right direction. And so that's how like the connection for the book, me realizing like some of the deeper rooted pieces of that, what self-sabotaging is, like why I do the people pleasing and connecting it back to that piece of my childhood. I think it freed me also in a way where I'm like, oh, so I need to show up for me in a different way. And so this is where we at.
Yeah, that's dope. It is funny because I was in a season not too long ago where someone called me and was like, Eb, you can't be fearful and faithful at the same time. And
I was not exist in the same place.
I was so mad when they told me that. Because I was like, listen, this is a lot. This is but what I've noticed is the more you're willing to lean into faith and it works out, the more faith you had. It's like, what does God say? You just need faith of a mustard seed, right?
That's it.
And so as I've like kind of navigated life, like there are moments where, I mean, this whole podcast, shout out HV Podcast, in the most amazing place in the world, just amazing humans. And so there are days where I just kind of sit and I'm like, yo, this literally came to fruition. And you had no idea what you were doing. Yo, I had no idea. But here's the piece, right? So to your point, like when you start to understand, like, I don't know for real, what all of this needs to look like. I just need to know the next step and be faithful and obedient in that step, right? And so I'm curious, like, it's a lot of things that you kind of broken free from. And I'm already going to claim the fact that you've already figured out that like sabotage is not the way. Mm-mm. And you didn't come this far to like not finish what it is you've started, right?
That's literally the tag in my car. Right? I didn't come this far to come this far.
100%. So what are you looking forward to and just thinking about like, what is this new sense? Because what I heard you say is like how proud of you, which really translates in my head to you are now empowered to know that you are literally driving the car of your life.
Yeah.
And you have decided to take, to be the leader in that process, right? No one else gets to tell Tasha how Tasha is going to impact and change the world. And whatever you take on, you're taking on knowing that the decision making is in your hands, right?
That's it.
So what do you look forward to as you continue to journey to your kindest self moving forward?
I look forward to just being at peace, being free, like relaxing my shoulders. I feel like, as simple as it sounds, that's not the life I had been living. And so I think for me, the biggest piece is I get to explore all over again. Like, at this age, I'm 37, and I realize how young this feels. I lost my mom when she was 34. At 34 sounded ancient. At 34, it's like, oh, like I got some juice in my blood, And so I was like, I got some life to live. And every year past that, I started to say, oh, let me start living. And so I think the thing I look forward the most to is doing that, like living. And so I'm not being prescriptive to it. I'm not setting a schedule. I think being able to go, the beautiful thing is, as long as I have my laptop, I'm good. As long as I have my laptop and I'm in a place of connectivity, I can run my business. I can also support the organizations that I support on the side. I can connect with family. And so I think that that's the beautiful part of it, is being able to live freely, authentically, without anyone else's conditions set on me, and me being able to figure out what that looks like. And some days it's great, and other days, like, I might stumble, but I'm okay with the stumbling because I know that it's me doing it freely. And so I think that that's the piece I look forward to the most, is being able to live the most authentic life I feel like I ever can. Because when you're not being true to yourself, and that was a situation I was in, I realized I wasn't being true to myself. And when you being true to yourself is in conflict with whatever you're doing, whether it's a relationship, whether it's a job, whether it's family, friends, whatever, it's like, oh, like, well, you might have to reassess yourself, because reflection's always good, right? Because it's like, okay, am I in the wrong? And what's mine to own? But then also outside of that, it's, well, what do I need to do, or what do I need to change about these circumstances so I can be me? Mm-hmm. And so I guess that's the other piece. Living and being me. Like, that's the biggest things I look forward to right now.
So I was going to end there, but I feel like there was a conversation we had outside. And in the book, I talk about this situation with a baby deer and the parent deer, right? And so I was expounding on it, and I was saying, it's in the book. I have a video on Hello Kind Soul podcast. If it's not the newest ones, it's an older video. You'll see the picture. But in that season of life was one of the hardest seasons of my life. And my life had been boiled down to these discrete moments of joy that typically came from things in nature. And so just to set it up for you, I'm watching, and this baby deer comes out, and the mom or dad or whomever is like eating calmly like a normal deer, I guess, would look. And this baby deer loses his mind and just running all over and acting crazy and like testing his legs. And then he stops and he like looks at the grown up and then starts to try to fake like, I'm this deer like them. And then the deer was like, man, miss me with that. And then he starts going crazy again, right? And in that moment, I remember it brought me such joy in such a challenging season. And I will always remember, but also because I likened my life coming out of a really hard season to when I realized, like, watching the deer or the baby, I'm like, oh, snacks, like his legs work and so do mine.
Yeah.
And so seeing that level of curiosity with that little creature just reminded me of like, your legs work too, go use them.
Yeah.
Right. And so I guess I'm curious, like how do you liken that situation to how you're navigating life right now in this new world for you?
Oh, that's me all day. Like, I'm defined. Like, I am, because I think I live so much of my life according to what I thought I was supposed to do. So like that moment where you talk about how he like straightens the leg and tries to get serious, like the deer, I've been doing that my whole life. Like, those legs have been going straight, and I'm trying to walk this path and try to be a good friend, a good family member, a good wife, a good worker, and all these things. And what I realize is like, let me just do me. Like, let me just get out here, play, figure it out, live, laugh. And I think that like I am that fawn. And so whenever we opened up the podcast talking about like where I'm at in life and I'm exploring, like that's where that's the most free place you could ever be. Like tapping back into like the things that make you happy. Like, is like, you don't have to stand up straight all the time. You don't have to look like anybody else, do it like anybody else. And today where we're at, like, if you are putting yourself in a box, and I'm going to say put yourself in a box because society has done that so long, but we're in 2024 now. Like, with the information, the access we have to technology, all the things, like we have the choice to bring ourselves out of that box. And so like, this is me breaking down that box. Like I'm not pigeonholing myself into one thing. Like I'm not just a 9-to-5 CFOO. I also own my own business. I also do recreation therapy on the side, which was my first love. I also love making soaps and candles and oils. Like me exploring and having fun with it, I'm tapping into the things that bring me joy. And I feel like that's the most authentic place I can be. And I remember walking into that, I felt like, oh, people are going to think she all over the place. Like, which one are you? Like, are you doing this? Or are you doing that? But that's a piece of how society has conditioned us. And I had to make the choice to say, you know what? But that's not how I have to be. And so like, I am that fawn right now. Me and the fawn, we are one. Like I'm out here playing. Like I've been even posting online. I'm like, I'm outside. We outside. So it's like, I'm just enjoying life all over again and figuring out what that means. Because me living life and having fun at this age I'm at now looks very different than what it looked like 10, 12 years ago.
100%.
And so that's the beautiful part about exploring as well. The other piece it looks like is like me being able to get a autograph from a dope author. Can we do that? So
we can do that.
The book is out, y'all. It's on Amazon. It's amazing. Like, please, please, please go get it. I actually have already made a list of 5 other people I'm planning to get this book for because it's that serious. Do yourself the favor. And so while we're here, can I please get your autograph?
100%. All right. So I have one other question to close us out. I'm going to sign this though first, y'all.
Take the moment. Oh, I feel special. That's like some words.
So our final question to close us out, you get to close us out, is what does it mean to be a kind soul?
Being a kind soul, I would say, is being well within yourself. Period. Full stop. How you say it. Like, I think when you're well within yourself, because when you're well within yourself, you're kind to yourself, you've nourished yourself, you've poured in that love. So it exudes out. It's kind of like, the law of attraction. So it's like when you're well within, it's going to beam out, period. And so I think if you can be well within yourself, and if you don't know what that means, again, pause, figure it out and say, what do I need to be okay? That won't make you well within yourself, but it's at least a good first step. So once you do that, and then you get to a place that you are well within yourself, you're at peace, you can breathe, you're out here playing like the fawn all over again. When you do that, the energy is magnetic. Like it goes into other souls that you touch. So you become a kind soul, I feel like, organically, just when you choose to do that.
Listen, y'all, I am so grateful that Tasha stopped by, and actually didn't stop by, came very far to be with us in community. I'm so grateful for your presence. I'm grateful for you being here today. And I'm just grateful for the gifts that you just gave them. Y'all have an amazing, amazing day, and we will see you next week. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.